Welcome back to another episode of Performance Process Podcast, where we break down the processes behind the world's best performances so you can apply them to your own riding. I'm your host, Ronan McLaughlin, and today we're tackling a question I've often been pondering. Should we change our bike fit for indoor riding? Indoor training has become a staple for cyclists of all levels, but as many of us have discovered, it comes with its own unique set of challenges. As a coach, I've always prescribed lower power targets for indoor sessions, but with so little movement compared to outdoors, should we consider our fit also? From saddle sores to knee pain and even that nagging lower back discomfort, training indoors can sometimes be more painful than it should be. That's where our expert guest today, Phil Burt, comes in. Phil is a world-renowned bike fitting expert and physiotherapist with over 12 years of experience with British Cycling and Team Sky. He's author of Bike Fit and Strength and Conditioning for Cyclists and has just released an insightful report on indoor cycling commissioned by Wahoo. Phil's been at the forefront of solving comfort issues for riders, and today he's going to guide us through the essentials of indoor bike fit, how to address common discomforts, and where the future of indoor technology is heading. So Phil, without further ado, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, Ron.
Good stuff. I remember, I didn't realise you had a second volume of your book out. I had the first volume 6-7 years ago. Whenever it first was published, I remember reading that. So
that was a long time ago. That was I wrote that during 2012. Never do a home Olympics, have your second child, and try and write a book. That wasn't a good year. And no, it's a good segue. The second edition of Bike Fit came out in 2022 because while COVID happened and everybody who could write a book decided to write a book, didn't they? But I'd learned so much more since. The only reason I wrote a book on bike fit, and the only reason why Bloomsbury would be quite happy with it, is when I came into cycling, I couldn't find any manual or book on bike fit. So that's why I thought there might be a need. It's not because I'm a good author. But the second book, actually, in the first one, if you did pick up a copy, and the first book hasn't got an indoor cycling chapter, but the second one has. And as you sort of loaded the session there, I was thinking about that, turbos existed, didn't they? But we didn't have Swift. Indoor cycling is here now, and it's here to stay. So hence why in my second chapter, there's a new chapter in there about some of the things we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, I mean, thanks to Wahoo that this podcast has happened. They connected the two of us, and that's because you've just written a report for them, Ergonomic Insight Report on Indoor Cycling. So I guess the first question, and the obvious question is, are there bike fit requirements or considerations specific to indoor training?
Yeah, I mean,
I hope so, because otherwise we're going to have a long podcast here.
No, good night. Bye-bye, everyone. Wouldn't that be great for good of that school? But there very much is. And I've been much more acutely aware of it during the COVID pandemic, because even our clinic was closed. But I've never had so many emails running from people who were seasoned cyclists, 20 years plus, never had a problem outdoors, throwing up with either saddle sore, knees blowing up, chronic low back pain, real acute low back. And I looked at it, first and foremost, I'm a physiotherapist. I looked at this and I went, well, why haven't they had those problems before? And ever since then, as indoor cycling has grown in that, we do get a run a bike fit clinic. People come in and they say, look, I get this problem indoors, but not outdoors, or the other way around. It can be sometimes, different reasons. So I very much think I think indoor cycling has a different, what we call epidemiology, that's a profile of the injuries you get and why and the causes of those, and we can sort of dig into those if you wanted to, for sure.
Yeah, I guess the question is, what are the common injuries then that you were hearing?
So what I tend to find is with indoor cycling is that we tend to the three most common cycling injuries, outdoor and indoor, are normally in this order: knee, I would say saddle sore, then low back pain, and then you get neck and shoulder pain outdoors. Don't tend to get neck and shoulder pain as much indoors because most people can adopt different positions. But what I find is that the threshold for some people getting those problems. So a lot of people would say, I can cycle for 2 hours, and after that, I might start to get a bit saddle sore, or in the same place as I always do, or my grotty knee blows up. What I tend to find, what indoor cycling does, is accentuate and lower the threshold of the time or the effort that's required to get to that point where you get uncomfortable discomfort and the issue. And I think that's because of the way indoor cycling is different. It's completely fixed most of the time. So. And so there's a few different elements, and the extra layer to add over that, just to be clear, is the environment. So I think not having wind blown over you makes a massive difference to one particular issue, which is saddle sores. Because if you haven't got wind blowing over you, one aspect of indoor cycling is you get a lot more sweaty. So I think a lot of people, for comfort reasons, use a fan. But I've actually solved some people's indoor saddle issues by literally getting them to point a fan at their backside. We design product as well, so I live in the world of design. A chamois cushion, but they also wig sweat, away from skin. So if you want to get skin breakdown, which is a nasty saddle sore, of course, but the four things you keep working in harness are pressure, friction, heat, and moisture, And if you think about it, first thing you go in the army, you get told, keep your feet dry because of those four things. If you get that and you get a blister, you can't march. You're useless to us. Yeah. And we learned this by British cycling by working with like world-class dermatologists and tribologists or friction experts. But somebody came to me, hold on a minute, indoor cycling just turns the volume up on all of those completely. So staying dry whilst you're indoor cycling is one of the key things to actually not getting a saddle sore or not get, accentuating your already saddle sore position. Add to that the fact that it's complete, the bike, if it's on a certain platform, will be completely fixed. Then you've got a very different pressure and friction mixture going in there compared to riding on the road. And so that's where I started to get, I've come up with hacks for people to somehow get away with that, and then, I manage it and get it in there. It basically comes down to outdoor cycling has much more degrees of freedom than in cycling. What I've done with Wahoo is looking, well, who does that affect more than other people? And if you have ever in my book, I trying to explain bike fit is a really hard thing because you have an infinite variable human in the middle of the picture. And then, of course, all the different positions we can have and adjustments of equipment. Very quickly, Ronan, I'll stop drilling in a second. If you imagine at one end of the spectrum, you have somebody who has a very, very narrow bike fit window. And all that means is if, we've been I'm sure you've been out with guys, and maybe you are yourself, who carry Allen keys and adjust things all the time. So there you go. So 2 millimeters out and it, Now that's really useful because actually you guys find optimal a lot quicker than other people, And in my book, I use the example of Geraint Thomas, who I call a macro absorber, not a micro absorber, because apart from when he crashes, which is far too often in his career, but he never bothered the physio room. He never breaks down from training. He's an incredibly robust athlete. But he once apparently rode half a stage of the Tour de France on the wrong spare bike, and he didn't even realise. Now, and you think, wow, that person can absorb that. So if we take Geraint Thomas, for example, indoor training platform, he probably jumped on it, it'll be fine. Doesn't mean he's optimal, but he's going to get away with it, and he's not going to be uncomfortable and painful. But other people, they really have to think about indoor cycling and what that, because all of a sudden, all those little movements that you've got in the out, all those natural breaks you're getting in and out of the saddle, all the bike moving underneath you, and that relates to power, by the way, your very, very interesting point about, I can give you some insight from that from British cycling when we used to test people. So I think we have to start, they are the same sport, but they are different types of the sport. And I also recognize some of the things about, I think goal setting is really important in that. But I'll sort of show up a minute and I'll let you ask you another question.
No. My job here is to let you speak. So don't let me interrupt you. One question I did have though was just, did you in researching this, did you find a specific amount of indoor cycling someone has to do before they are at risk? If someone does 45 minutes twice a week, should they just adopt their normal position, or where's the threshold? Yeah.
So leaning on my, over 15 years of experience and treating these people, I definitely anecdotally will find that, most people can ride indoors for 30 minutes without having much of a problem, What I tended to find was, I call the magic number of the outdoors when I'm rehabbing someone. Once we get to 2 hours and we back that up day to day, if they can do that, you're out the woods, you're pretty much in, like, you can go now, if you're going to have a problem, you're going to have it before then. That's just my rule of thumb, right? And it seemed to work pretty well. What happens is that comes way down in indoor cycling. You're going to find out issues quicker because of the fixed nature. It's going to find your weakness or find your asymmetry or find that thing, that old injury you got that means you pedal a certain way. And it's such a detective story. It could be like, you have a functional leg length difference because of an old injury or the twisted pelvis. That means you sit off the one side, which always means you get right-sided saddle sore. You wouldn't believe, most people get saddle sore normally in the same place. There's lots of different types. And then it's like, well, indoor cycling literally turns the volume button up on asymmetry because it's so fixed. So you have to move around the fixed bike and you're going to put more pressure in that area. So So in answer to your question is that I see a lot of people who, that number you just said about 45 minutes, say, look, I get a 45 minutes, just really uncomfortable and not feeling great. So, but I want to do 2 hours on Swift. So,
I mean, that's interesting. Are there, like, everybody's different, as you've said, but are there specific interventions that you see work for riders when we go indoors? Is it a higher saddle height? Is it further forward? Is it shorter cranks? Is there hard and fast rules, or is it very variable?
I think at this point, you have to go back to what your goal for indoor cycling is. So those things you mentioned. So somebody's doing a stack of indoor cycling to directly correlate and transfer over to their outdoor performance. They probably don't want to change the position much because they want to stay in there and get in, positional endurance and holding an aero position, for example, and things like that, So in which case, out the window go all those massive adjustments that you can make to that, because indoor cycling has to replicate what they want to do on the outdoors. However, most people aren't doing that, if you ask me. So in fact, probably not listening to this podcast, but there's a whole bunch of people who use indoor cycling for what we call off-feet conditioning, So there's lots of runners who will use cycling. Cycling is much more less injurious. So that for some people, if they're not bothered about indoor cycling corroborating, correlating, and transferring to outdoor performance, I would say the indoor position looks vastly different. But first of all, what I would say stays the same is the way I look about it, the back end, your engine room, so saddle height, saddle setback, and saddle tilt stay the same, right? Your glutes and your quads and everything are working the same length-tension relationships, and that will carry over, so your muscles will feel the same when they go to. What I would take the pressure off, and I found massive results, is just if it's on an indoor bike, for example, very easy to do, just an indoor smart bike, but just bring the front end up and bring it back and relax, because you're not having to push any air. So the reason why we're normally low and close to the front, so I'd argue, the ideal Swift position to win Swift races is as unaerodynamic as you can probably make it. It means that I would rather say, and it correlates well, if we bring the front end up and back and relax your back off, you're going to sit more solidly on that bike in that nice, powerful position. So, but if you were to come down to earth like an alien and just go, well, what is it? And nothing like that. For example, crank length's a really hot topic, and I've been going on about it for years. But for most people, reduction in crank length just makes cycling a whole lot easier. And for reasons that we can go on forever, it's less kinematic distance for the need to travel, allows you to sit in an easier position. For me as a physio, opens up the hip, which is the crucial joint in cycling. So there are little hacks you can do. But the other thing is, if people are trying to mimic outdoor cycling, so let's say we can't change, we don't want to change our position, all right? We want the position to stay the same. But it's indoors. In that case, let's try and address the other elephant in the room, which is very fixed. And I think what you do with that, with rocker plates, and I use the reason why I hit it, I use the Wahoo stuff on my clicker, right? So I think it's quite good. For example, the Wahoo clicker bike with its variation in crank length, fantastic for finding out your ideal crank length. But they are the roller and the move. Now, nearly every bike in the world uses a Wahoo roller now, because it's much more like outdoor cycling, but that degrees. So I talk about degrees of freedom of movement. And then with human beings, what I think, Ronan, is we all cycle with you or behind people. Some of us move better than others, but we all have our preferred movement pathway, okay? And that's completely unique and individual to you, Doing a one-legged knee jump, every human being does it in a similar way, but we all do it ever so slightly different to everyone else. If your performance is on a knife edge like this, a very, very steep hit, and either side you get over is pain, discomfort, or injury, then you need those degrees of freedom. So that's where the other way I've sorted out a lot of people is saying, look, you need to introduce freedom into it. But that can be as simple as not something really expensive, like I've literally done it with set an alarm on your watch, on your handlebars, and every 5 minutes you will stand up for 2 seconds out of the saddle. Because that's what we miss, honestly, just breaking up the sustained pressure on your bum. If you get, you're a pretty driven individual, world record for everything, I understand, things like this. If you're looking at Swift on the front deck, you're not going to remember to stand up indoors, are you? It's not going to happen. Simple hacks can be literally changing your position by remembering to stand up every 5 minutes. It's just things like that. But if you can afford or are taking it really seriously, I think an indoor platform that increases the degrees of freedom and moves that. And there are other ways of doing that. The Wahoo have the climb, and some of the indoor smart bikes have this function we can go up and down. Literally those, because the other problem with indoor cycling, the gradient never changes. Now, what I can tell you from that, having done probably more pressure studies than anyone in the world, is changes in gradient is really important for pressure management on your saddle, because basically your pelvis rolls forward and backwards and it changes, so you don't even notice it, but you are sitting differently and loading tissues in different ways. So that's another good way of doing it. Combining the two can be really powerful. So, you had a fan, an elevator, and an elevation system, Wahoo climb, whatever it is, and then degrees of freedom in the back, that the move of the roll off. All of a sudden, you're getting a lot more like outdoor cycling. So you're probably not. I'd say what I see with those people is the threshold before their pain issue injury comes on, all of a sudden gets a lot more like outdoor cycling, a lot less quick.
Yeah, I mean, you've well, specifically there on the climb and those gradient simulators, like I've been asked 1,000 times, are they a good job? And my answer is always like, yes, but not for like simulating gradient, for the position change that it gives you. Every so often you're just like loading different muscle groups, you're putting pressure in different places. And for that reason, I've recommended them in the past. They are quite expensive, but you've hit the nail on the head there of another question I was going to ask you, and that is, so far with indoor riding, and it's I don't think it's a mature discipline within the sport yet, but it's certainly maturing. We've always been optimizing and adapting around an outdoor bike fit with no real idea if that's the optimal approach or not. Am I hearing you right in saying that if you're the type of cyclist maybe listening to this podcast who does a lot of outdoor riding and a lot of indoor riding, you're maybe best to maximize your gains for outdoor riding, maintaining the same position?
100%. If that's your goal, from the point of first principles of it, you want to make it look as similar as possible, because the more you deviate from it, the more there might be a loss of that training effect as you come across, But I think that's true. But I think you make a really good point. Is the outdoor fit optimal? It's like you have this. We're assuming it is, and it could be. But if someone came to me and said, "I want to ride indoors and outdoors, but I'm not really concerned if the positions are different," I think they are optimally different, if that makes sense. Yeah. So to go further with less discomfort and more optimal, I think you could argue that I reckon these days, the indoor cycling position. And but going back to your point, I completely agree with you. I find the climb things that simulate ascent and descent, I find them quite alien and artificial to feel when you're riding them. But I'd recommend it for exactly the same reason you. It's not to simulate climbing. If you want to simulate climbing, go and do climbing. Because well,
I mean, if you wanted to simulate climbing, we can just stick a load of books under your front wheel and it would achieve the same thing.
Yeah, it's more that exactly. It's just the degree of freedom and changing position and making it fluid. This is an interesting story. Won't be naming any names, obviously, but I've looked after quite a lot of people who do race across America. I'm sure you're. Okay. Are you going to have a pop of that one day, Ronan, or no?
I've always said no, but I know I've done a lot of things that I've always said I wouldn't do.
You sound like a lot of the people I looked after. I said, but this is crazy. I knew a guy who trained for it, and then COVID hit, but they ran it online. Do you know that, didn't they? But
yep.
What they didn't take account of was the fact that in actual RAM, you don't have to pedal going downhill, but on the online version, you did. So he worked it out. He said that I had to pedal so much further. You just couldn't freewheel, or on his system you couldn't. But these guys, these are a little bit. These are who you don't base indoor cycling on. Because when I asked him if you ever got saddle sores, he goes no. And then he came back to it. Well, I do bleed underneath sometimes. And I'm like, whoa. What do you mean? He goes, but it's not sore. And I'm like, yeah. And this comes to, different people have different perceptions of pain or a problem.
A good question to come off the back of that one then is, what should riders look out for as indicators there is maybe a problem with their indoor riding position? Bleeding is one, I'm assuming.
Yeah, blood on the floor. Unexplained blood. And so most of the time, it's a really good question, actually, because some people don't realize. They just think, oh, well, indoor cycling's harder, so I expect to suffer more. I think it's if you're getting to only half an hour and you're in quite a lot of discomfort, and say a lot of people have one-sided back pain or a knee niggle, if that's coming on after half an hour, but on the road you're not getting that for good 90 minutes, 2 hours, and that's a sign that, whoa, indoor cycling is really stressing your system in a way that ultimately could lead to something that takes you off the bike. And that's where I jump in and go, well, you don't want that. Indoor cycling's got to work for the purpose it's designed for. So I think at that point, that's when you might want to examine your position, adjust the position, or adjust the platform that you're using to achieve indoor cycling. And so I think it's when, for some people, for example, as I mentioned at the beginning, hold on a minute, I've never had this problem outdoors, but I have a raging saddle sore on the left-hand side or indoors. That happens to some people, just the natural movement of being in the saddle outdoors and breaks, and all of a sudden you fix that up, you're probably looking at a significant percentage increase in loading in the same area, so it's not unsurprising in some ways,
I mean, one of the best things about the online platforms that are available now is that 20 years ago, we were kind of capped at 45 minutes to an hour of indoor training at a time because the wall in front of us just wasn't all that engaging. Whereas these online platforms are now engaging, and you can easily and enjoyably spend hours upon hours training indoors. You looked at saddle pressure as part of this report. What did you find? What did you find there?
So, as somebody who's done loads of research with saddle pressure, help design these saddles and change rules and everything, when we looked at indoor training versus outdoor training, and we simulated outdoor training, by the way, by putting someone on a treadmill. We have cycling treadmills in the institute are working, so you measure, as close as we could do. What's really interesting is when you go to the very fixed platform, it's how you're distributing the pressure and where it's going. And what's happening is we see a massive increase in asymmetry, and that corroborates in my mind to the bike is fixed, so you have to move around the bike. So the pressure indicates that. Yeah. So what we got is a lot more side to side movement. And we know this because we can track like the average center of pressure and the total And then what was really surprising, so for example, with the Wahoo Move, I don't know if you've seen it, it moves backwards and forwards as well as sideways. But what I'm really surprised was when we did a little test of returning to the saddle. So, you're doing a sprint on Swift and you sit back down. I always suspected this because when we were at British Cycling, we saw a different type of saddle injury with a track cyclist, and it was the slam back into the saddle that caused it. So when you get up, standing start, up for the first half or quarter of the lap, and then people go bang down into the saddle. So it's more the shearing force. And in the report, we saw massive reductions if the platform can move in a forward-backwards direction. There's a big reduction in landing pressures, if you want to call them. Lastly, it makes total sense, but the roller. Because you've still got the tire and wheel attached, the pressure's just massively reduced because you've got a suspension system on your back. It's really obvious, isn't it? But quite significant reduction in pressure. So I now say to some people who, if you've got raging saddle sores, and some people cycle and they manage saddle sores all the time, you're aware of them. They're always waiting for you. Or you can say to them as well, if you don't want to have that indoors, maybe this is the platform for you. Because look, this is going to cause you less issue.
I know myself, like I can just picture myself getting up for a sprint indoors or getting out of the saddle, and then that, as you sit yourself down again, you're sort of tensing up your entire body to gently place yourself back into the saddle, like even without saddle sores or anything. And I've always just wondered, like, is that going to have a knock-on effect elsewhere? Like if I'm tightening up my hip flexors and my thighs and everywhere else, it just doesn't feel normal, doesn't feel natural.
Yeah. I had a player on just surely, on N equals 1 angle to myself. I know exactly what you mean. It was like, it's a much more cautious landing. And so what you do with that is you're probably, tensing up your knee quite a lot when you're doing that because you're eccentrically, controlling you as you sit down. So I just found it much more relaxing and normal. And I suppose the other thing we can think about there, Ronan, is just, the more things you the more you can enjoy your indoor cycling, right? Because the last thing I want to do is scare people off from what has been a massively successful platform for most people to get into, and people are fitter for it and healthier for it. So we don't want to demonize indoor cycling. It's great, Which makes it, if the winter comes on, just as a side anecdote, I see signs people who come in every winter get a really bad cold, and I look at him and go, so where do you draw your trainer? He goes, I go out whatever the weather. But you get cold every winter. This time, it's like, why don't you adapt that? I think a lot of people are clocking onto that, that they can do more quality training indoors. So this is just an insight report at the moment, but I don't know whether you thought about it. I think when there's been a raft of kit that came out for indoor cycling, and without naming names, I'd say 90% of that was a bit of a let's take our hot weather kit and turn it into indoor kit, because breathability. But I do wonder, I do wonder whether some things might change, and whether we might say, look, if I'm riding indoors, I'm going to ride shorter cranks, If they make indoor cycling better, then I'm going to put them on my outdoor bike because there is no cost of performance. I might as well pay that outdoors. So I don't know. I think we don't know all the answers to this new phenomenon, but it definitely causes more people issues quicker in the same areas that it does outdoor cycling. Yeah, there aren't these completely new. There's nothing completely new, as it were. Just more of the same.
Okay, folks, that's where we're cutting off the free version of this podcast this week. Just a reminder, if you head over to escapecollective.com/member, you can sign up now and you can get the entire podcast uninterrupted. You'll not have me butting in to cut you off or to remind you that you're not yet a member. And in doing so, you will be helping to ensure this podcast continues for many more episodes and months and years to come. So head over escapecollective.com/member now to sign up to Escape Collective and to get the entire episode of Performance Process along with all of the other podcasts and written content that we publish on our website.